My brother used my house for his wedding. Then 2 days later he showed up with a moving truck. Thought he was joking. He wasn't. Before I get into everything, tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. I never imagined my sanctuary would become the battleground for the ugliest betrayal of my life. I'm 33, living in upstate New York in a farmhouse I spent years renovating after my parents passed away. That house isn't just walls and paint to me. It's every late night fixing broken beams, every tear I shed while grieving, every inch of hard-earned peace. So when my younger brother Eli asked if he could hold his wedding there, I said yes without hesitation. He was family. And family meant everything to me back then. The wedding was beautiful. I watched from the porch as twinkle lights wrapped the trees and laughter filled the yard. Eli looked so happy, and Mads, his fiancée, called it a fairy tale come true. My heart swelled because it felt like I was giving them a piece of something precious. But even during the toasts, I caught small details that made my stomach twist. Mads ran her hand along the porch railing and said, "I can't wait to make this place ours." Eli wouldn't meet my eyes. I told myself not to overthink it. It was just pre-wedding excitement. 2 days later, I was drinking coffee in the kitchen, still cleaning up the remnants of the celebration, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I looked out the window and froze. A moving truck. Eli jumped out of the driver's seat, Mads trailing behind him, both dressed like people who'd already decided they belonged here. I stepped outside and asked what was going on. Eli grinned like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Well, you said you'd help us start our life. This place is perfect," he said, nodding toward the house. I laughed, waiting for the punchline. It never came. Instead, he started unloading boxes like my home had always been theirs. And in that moment, something inside me cracked. The kind of crack you don't just patch up. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of a war I never asked for. I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself it was some ridiculous joke that got too far. But Eli didn't smile back. He leaned against the truck like a man who already owned the place, and the weight of that silence felt like a slap. When I told him to stop playing around, he sighed and said something that made my blood run cold. "You know, Mom and Dad would have wanted this. I'm the one starting a family. It just makes sense." My hands shook, but I forced a steady voice. "That's not how any of this works, Eli. This is my home." He reached into a folder and pulled out a paper, an old letterhead with my father's name on top, typed paragraphs, and a shaky signature at the bottom. He held it like a weapon. "This says otherwise," he said. The second I saw it, I knew. That signature wasn't my dad's. He'd never mentioned anything like this, never changed the will. The farmhouse was legally mine, and Eli knew it too. The air between us snapped. His expression hardened, and Mads crossed her arms with that rehearsed, pitying look she does so well. "You're really going to be this selfish?" she asked, like I was the intruder here. Eli echoed her, calling me a hoarder of family legacy, twisting everything I'd built into something I should be ashamed of. It didn't stop there. By the end of the day, whispers had spread like wildfire. Aunt June called, sounding disappointed, telling me I should do the right thing and support my brother's future. Neighbors started dropping subtle comments, as if they already believed I was the greedy sister clinging to what wasn't mine. I stood in my own kitchen and felt the ground tilt beneath me. The house I'd poured my life into was suddenly the center of a narrative I didn't create. Eli and Mads moved through it like they belonged, while I became the villain in a story they wrote. I kept repeating in my head, "This can't be real," but every look, every whisper, every finger pointed at me said otherwise. In just a few hours, the people I grew up around had chosen their side, and it wasn't mine. Boxes filled every corner of the hallway before I even had the chance to process what was happening. They didn't ask. They didn't knock. They just carried their belongings straight into the guest room like they owned it. Mads tossed her coat onto the chair. Eli whistled some tune like he was settling in, and I stood there, gripping the doorframe so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I asked how long they planned on staying, Mads gave a sugar-sweet smile and said, "Just for a little while until things are official." My stomach twisted. There was nothing official about this. I told them to leave. They pretended not to hear me. Nate showed up that evening, hoping to calm things down. He's always been the peacemaker, the one who believes everything can be fixed with the right words. He tried to reason with Eli, explaining boundaries, respect, basic decency. But Eli just shrugged like Nate was background noise. Mads stood beside him, arms folded, like a queen watching her kingdom being challenged. The next morning, it hit me how fast everything was shifting. My paintings, the ones I spent months working on, were stacked in a corner like junk. My grandmother's mirror was gone from the hallway wall. New curtains I didn't pick hung in the living room. My furniture was rearranged as if erasing my touch from every corner. It was subtle, almost quiet, but each change carved deeper into me. And it wasn't just them. The silence from everyone else screamed louder than any words could. No one called to check on me. No one questioned their actions. It was as if the world had already decided I should accept it like I always had. That betrayal, the quiet kind, cut sharper than Eli's lies ever could. That night, I sat alone in my bedroom, the only part of the house still untouched. I could hear their laughter through the wall like they were celebrating taking something from me. I pulled the blanket tighter, hoping the noise would fade. Then Eli's voice cut through everything, clear and low. "She'll cave. She always does." It was a whisper meant to reassure Mads. To them, my boundaries weren't real. I wasn't a person. I was a hurdle they'd already decided they'd step over. I walked into the kitchen one morning and stopped cold. New bar stools. A different rug. Light fixtures I'd never seen before hanging from the ceiling. At first I thought maybe I was still half asleep, but then I saw the receipt left on the counter. Charged to my card. My name. My account. My money. It wasn't just a few things. Every corner of my home was slowly being stripped of me. The bathroom mirror had been swapped out. The dining room table was gone, replaced with something Mads must have picked online. Even the plates in the cupboard were new. My password-protected accounts? She'd somehow gotten in. I confronted her while she was rearranging my books like she owned every page. "You had no right to use my card," I said. She didn't flinch. She didn't even pause. Just tilted her head with that smug little smile. "You're just jealous we're happy," she said softly, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Something inside me snapped. For weeks I'd swallowed the frustration trying to keep the peace. But standing there, surrounded by everything they'd taken over, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I told them to get out. Every word sharp and final. Mads laughed like it was cute. Eli stepped forward, his face hard. "We're not leaving," he said. When I tried to push past him, his hand clamped around my wrist. It wasn't just a grip. It was a warning. Nate was there in seconds, pulling Eli off me. The room exploded into shouting, her calling me bitter, him accusing me of betrayal, me screaming for them to get out of my house. I grabbed my phone and called the sheriff. I thought it would end there, that the law would fix what they'd broken. But when the deputies showed up, Eli pulled out envelopes. Mail with his name. They'd changed their address. Claimed residence. And just like that, everything shifted. The deputy looked at me with a kind of tired sympathy I'll never forget. "You'll need to handle this through the court," he said. Eli stood behind him, smirking. They stayed. I stood there in the middle of a house that no longer felt like mine, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. It wasn't just my home they'd taken. It was control. I packed a single duffel bag that night, grabbed my keys and walked out without saying a word. The moment the door closed behind me, the silence hit like a weight pressing down on my chest. I drove straight to Tessa's place. She didn't ask questions when I showed up at her door, just wrapped me in a blanket and handed me a cup of tea like she'd known this was coming all along. For the first time in weeks I could breathe. No Mads humming in the kitchen. No Eli stomping through hallways that weren't his. Just quiet. Heavy, unfamiliar quiet. The calls started the next morning. Aunt June, a neighbor, even an old friend. Every voice carried the same soft, infuriating tone. Just let it go. Like it was easy. Like my entire life hadn't been ripped apart from the inside. They called it keeping peace. I called it surrender. But beneath that quiet, something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to wait for someone to fix this. I knew who still had every scrap of paper tied to that house. I knew where to start. I called Mr. Avery. He'd handled my father's affairs years ago, the kind of man who remembers everything and forgets nothing. We met in his office 2 towns over, tucked behind rows of dusty legal files. He didn't waste time with small talk. He slid a folder across the desk and I flipped through the familiar handwriting and notarized seals. Everything clean. Everything real. Then he showed me a copy of what Eli had waved in my face. And I saw it for what it was. A fake. No question. My hands stopped shaking for the first time in days. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and let the truth settle. He thought he could bluff me. He thought I'd fold like always. When I walked out of that office, the cold air bit at my skin, but for once I welcomed it. This wasn't just about taking back walls and floors. It was about reminding him whose blood built that house. I wasn't going to fight loud. I was going to fight smart. And he'd never see it coming. I showed up at the house a few days later with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Mads opened the door like she'd already won, and Eli hovered behind her, arms crossed, suspicious but smug. I swallowed the bitter taste in my mouth and forced my voice steady. "Maybe we started this wrong," I said. "Let's figure it out together." The change in their faces was instant. Mads practically glowed. Eli relaxed just enough to think I'd finally surrendered. That's what they wanted, to see me bend. I let them believe it. I started talking about updates to the house, pretending to offer help to make the place more livable for everyone. They didn't question it. Within days, contractors walked through the front door with clipboards and cameras, taking photos of every damaged wall, every piece of furniture, every invoice connected to my accounts. What Eli and Mads didn't realize was that every signature, every unauthorized charge, every new delivery was being documented down to the cent. While I worked quietly, Mads acted like she'd inherited a palace. She started hosting gatherings that turned into loud, drunken messes. Music shaking the walls, cigarette burns on the porch, wine stains bleeding into the wood I spent years sanding. I didn't argue anymore. I just recorded. Phone in my pocket, camera catching everything. The trashed rooms, the names of their guests, the exact dates. Then the cracks in their perfect little act began to show. Late one night, while pretending to help Mads sort through bills, I found a folder shoved into a drawer. Stacks of overdue notices, maxed out credit cards, all in her name. She wasn't living a dream. She was running from a disaster. And Eli, he'd gone further. Deeper. While combing through old files with my lawyer's guidance, I uncovered transfers from our father's insurance payout. Money that was supposed to stay untouched. He drained it to fund their wedding and whatever fantasy they'd built in their heads. Standing in the hallway, hidden behind a half-closed door, I watched them laugh about how easy it was to take what should have been ours anyway. My hands didn't shake this time. My breathing didn't falter. They thought they were playing a game. But the pieces were already shifting and they didn't even see it. The table was set the way Mom used to do it. Candles flickering low, soft music humming through the old speaker. Everything carefully placed like nothing had ever gone wrong. When Eli and Mads walked in, they wore matching smug smiles, the kind that made my skin crawl. Mads twirled her hair like she was walking into a celebration, not a reckoning. I cooked their favorites. I poured the wine. I let them get comfortable. They thought this was a truce, a final surrender, me accepting what they'd taken. They had no idea the ground beneath them was already cracking. Eli leaned back in his chair halfway through the meal, grinning. "Glad you finally came to your senses," he said. I didn't answer. I slid a folder across the table instead. It landed with a quiet thud. Mads frowned, reaching for it first. The moment she opened it, the color drained from her face. Inside was everything. The original will. The notarized signatures. The proof of forged pages. Transaction records from the insurance funds Eli had bled dry. Photos, statements, timelines. Every thread pulled together neatly. And tucked at the back, a stamped copy of a police report. Eli stiffened. "What the hell is this?" His voice cracked just enough to make my chest tighten, but I didn't flinch. I looked him in the eye and spoke evenly. "Truth." He slammed his hand on the table, trying to regain control. "You're ruining the family," he hissed. It wasn't guilt. It was desperation. I didn't shout back. I didn't give him what he wanted. I leaned forward slightly and whispered, "You already did." The silence after that was loud. Mads shoved her chair back, muttering something sharp under her breath before storming toward the door. Eli stayed seated, frozen, staring at the evidence he thought didn't exist. His confidence drained out of him like water through cracked glass. I watched his hands tremble as he tried to form a sentence. But there was nothing left for him to say. The game was over and he knew it. He'd built everything on a lie and I'd just pulled the foundation out from under him. For the first time in months I felt steady. Not because it was over, because I'd finally taken back my voice. The knock came early in the morning, sharp and deliberate. I opened the door to see two officers standing on the porch, their breath visible in the cold air. Behind them, Eli stood pale and tense, while Mads clutched her purse like it could shield her from what was coming. The moment their eyes met mine, something shifted. The officers stepped inside without hesitation, papers in hand. Eli's voice cracked as he tried to talk over them, spinning excuses, throwing out half-truths like lifelines. But Mads didn't back him. She stood stiff, lips pressed tight, eyes fixed on the floor. Then when they asked her directly, the dam finally broke. "He made me do it," she said, voice shaking. It was quiet, but it echoed through the room like a door slamming shut. She talked fast, how he convinced her it was just a formality, how he'd planned every signature, every fake statement. Each word chipped away at whatever mask Eli had left. He turned on her instantly, whispering her name like a warning, but it didn't matter. The officers moved in, handcuffs clicked, and I watched the boy I once trusted be led away in silence. No screaming. No scene. Just the sound of boots on the wooden floor he tried to steal from me. When the door closed behind them, the house was quiet again. But it wasn't the same quiet I remembered. It was heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. I walked through each room slowly, fingertips grazing the chipped paint, the cracked tiles, the stains that never should have been there. The living room still held faint traces of their chaos. Overturned frames, scuffed floors, curtains that didn't belong. My chest ached, not from losing anything physical, but from the truth that nothing about this place felt untouched anymore. I reached the back porch and stood where the wedding lights once hung, where laughter had spilled like it was endless. That night had felt like family. But every laugh I remembered now carried a shadow I couldn't shake. The house was mine again. Every inch, every key, every right. But standing there, it didn't feel like a win. It felt like something had cracked inside me that couldn't be repaired. Family wasn't supposed to burn you down. But he had. And I'd never forget it. The first night alone after everything ended, the house felt foreign. It was mine again, but every wall carried echoes I couldn't ignore. I stood in the middle of the living room with a hammer in one hand and a trash bag in the other, staring at the mess they'd left behind. No lawyers. No shouting. Just the soft sound of rain against the windows. I started small. Nails pulled from the walls, broken curtain rods tossed outside, paint chips scraped away. One corner at a time, I peeled their fingerprints off my home. It wasn't about fixing everything at once. It was about taking it back piece by piece. Nate showed up most evenings with takeout and his quiet kind of support. He didn't try to control the pace or tell me to move on faster. He just held the ladder when I needed it, carried the heavy boxes, and let me do the rest. I worked until my hands were raw, letting the silence soak through the house like fresh air. The kitchen came first. Then the hallway. By the third week, the house started to sound different again. Less like an echo chamber of betrayal, more like somewhere I could breathe. Every brushstroke, every board replaced, every nail hammered in was mine. No one else's. Aunt June showed up one afternoon, holding a pie she didn't really expect me to eat. She stood on the porch, eyes unsure, and whispered a soft apology. I didn't say anything back. I just let her speak. Words couldn't undo the silence she'd chosen when it mattered most. When she left, the quiet settled in again. But this time it wasn't heavy. It was steady. The kind of quiet that doesn't choke you. It grounds you. I walked through the house that night barefoot, running my fingers along the freshly painted walls. It wasn't perfect. There were still cracks to patch, still memories I couldn't scrub away. But it finally felt like mine again. Not because I'd inherited it, not because I'd won a fight, but because I built it back on my terms. For the first time in a long time, the stillness didn't hurt. It held me. The envelope showed up without warning, his handwriting instantly familiar. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the kitchen counter for hours, the weight of it filling the room. When I finally unfolded the paper, it was everything I expected. Apologies wrapped in excuses, words about family, promises he'd never keep. He wanted forgiveness. He wanted me to pretend it hadn't happened. I folded the letter neatly, set it aside, and grabbed the truck keys. The same rusted vehicle that had rolled into my driveway that day still sat out back like a ghost. I started the engine, the sound rough but steady, and drove until the junkyard gates came into view. I didn't look back at it when I stepped out. I left the keys on the seat, closed the door, and walked away. That truck had carried his arrogance, his lies, everything he tried to take from me. Leaving it behind wasn't just about metal and wheels. It was the last thread. By the time I reached the house, the sun was dipping low, casting a warm light across the porch. It didn't feel heavy anymore. The silence wasn't a reminder of what I'd lost but of what I'd taken back. For the first time in a long time it felt like home. Do you think I made the right choice by cutting ties completely, or should I have let them back in? I honestly want to hear your thoughts. And if you enjoy stories like mine, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned.